Joe, how long have you been out here for?
50 years.
So 50 years ago, you purchased this land?
I purchased this land, 2.8 acres. It cost me $800. Last good deal. That was during the Vietnam War, and there were some people who looked askance at long-haired people, as there are today, I suppose. But by and large, people are pretty tolerant. It's like live and let live kind of attitude.
Right.
For many, many years, I'd say my annual income was well under $10,000. I've always been below poverty line. I don't worry about taxes at all.
You grow all your own food, or a lot of it?
No, a lot of it. We've got land for it, we just don't have the people.
So you're looking for people to come out here?
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to help, like, stay here for a little bit of time, or be here permanently?
Both. Eventually, somebody's gonna have to take this place over. I'm 80 years old and my health is not great. So I'm thinking like about an 8-person eco-village, small community situation. This is a project to create what I call a paradise garden, which is various definitions for, but one of them is a botanical garden of useful plants grown ecologically and arranged ornamentally. Meaning a beautiful garden where all the plants are pretty much growing by themselves, and I can become sort of a hunter-gatherer in my own garden. I just need to remember where they are and when to get them and so on. When I started, I'd been reading a lot of anthropology. At that time in the 60s, there was all this information coming out about hunter-gatherers, and a lot of interest in just how we got ourselves into the situation we're in vis-a-vis the planet, where we find ourselves like being the most destructive organism ever. And a lot of the thinking was along the lines of it all went wrong with the beginning of agriculture. A lot of people think that's when all of a sudden we went from living as part of Gaia to wanting to manipulate. So the thinking is, well, of course we couldn't live like that anymore because there's too many people.
Right, right.
So my response to that is to up the carrying capacity of my land. I want my land to be able to support more people. So how do I do that? I pack it with more and more useful species. How do I do that? Well, A is figure out where they are, and like the obvious place is East Asia, so there's a very similar bioclimate and so on. So if you want more plants, more diversity of plants, then you want more diversity of habitats. For instance, there's no standing water on my land. The water comes down from above in the national forest and then it sinks into the ground.
And these are some of the, well, the biggest peak in the Appalachian range is Mount Mitchell, right up there, right?
Right up there.
So right beyond these trees.
Yeah, we're at the foot of the Black Mountains, and I'm the last place on the road adjoining the national forest. I grew up in Detroit. My family moved, is what got me to North Carolina. My dad was a professor, and he went to the Library of Congress for a while and decided he'd rather teach, so he came down to North Carolina. And so I came along with the family, because free tuition.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went off in the Peace Corps and lived with tribal people in Borneo for about 3 years and suffered significant culture shock when I came back home.
Right.
The culture shock was not going over there. The culture shock was coming back and seeing this glut of stuff that we have. Just walking into a mall and like, you know. I spent several years thinking about going back to graduate school and studying anthropology and going back overseas and working with these people. And eventually I decided I didn't really want to study, because I was so impressed with their lifestyle. I mean, here's people, you're coming out of Detroit where, you know, you don't really do anything except have a job, make money, and fulfill all your needs with your money. Here's people that build their own houses, grow their own food. They're pretty much self-reliant. All the communication is by river, little canoes along the river. They're really not going anywhere much. So that was amazing. And then they had, you know, all their rituals and their costumes and just such a rich life that they had. But eventually I decided I didn't really want to study it. I just wanted to live it myself. So like, because they were all healthier and happier than people in America, with so little, making so little demand on the earth. I was back in Detroit, and my next door neighbors was a little kind of hippie commune of craftspeople, and they've got a line on some land right here in this valley.
Okay.
They were interested because a famous craft school is not very far from here called Penland School of Crafts. So I came down with them, and like most hippie communes, it lasted a couple of years and then kind of imploded.
Sorry to interrupt. Why do you think they implode? Why do they work well in Borneo but maybe not here?
I don't know, maybe because we're all such individualists.
Okay.
You know, would be one speculation.
Sure.
But you know, that's what we need to create. That's the next frontier. Like I made this paradise garden out of a couple of acres of land that was too rocky and steep. It had never been farmed. Nobody'd look at it. Now phase 2 is to have a community to take it over and run it. This is my kind of signature herb, which I think I introduced to America actually, but I promote it as the best plant to grow for your health. Gynostema pentaphyllum, Chinese name jiaogulan. It's a vine, it's actually in the squash family, but it has identical compounds to ginseng, and ginseng is very much under threat of overharvesting. Wild ginseng out of the woods is worth $1,000 a pound some years.
Wow.
This stuff is practically a weed, but it has identical compounds to ginseng. So
What does it do for your health? What does it do for your
it's
health?
what's called an adaptogen, which means it's they're health promoting. They're not really sickness curing. They're health promoting, and they boost your immune system. This whole concept of adaptogens was actually developed by the Russians, who wanted to win more gold medals at the Olympics. So they put a lot of research into their adaptogen, because they don't have much ginseng. They have something called Siberian ginseng, which is right over here somewhere.
So do you use all of these plants in your daily life?
That one I drink every day. So one of the ways that was discovered, it was a folk herb. It was not one of the traditional Chinese herbs that's been used for thousands of years. Chinese government started keeping good enough statistics to realize that certain parts of China had an extraordinarily large number of centenarians, people living to be 100 years old. Like there's way more of them in this part of China. So they went down to investigate, and they're all drinking this stuff and calling it immortality tea. So that's kind of when it came to more global notice. It's huge now all over East Asia. It's coming to America. They call it sweet tea vine. It's showing up in tea shops. But it's not as big as it's gonna be. Goji berries. Who ever heard of goji berries 20 years ago? Nobody. It's a famous Chinese blood tonic. Now they're everywhere. Shazaandra's another one that's coming on. One by one, they come to America.
But if you go to your average doctor, they're going to give you some
The
drug.
AMA is not very fond of herbs
Okay.
for various reasons, including historical, because in the last century there was a huge rivalry between the herbal people, who are called eclectics, and they had their own medical schools and their own journals, and they were very active. They're the ones that brought all the American Indian herbs into Western practice. But there was a huge rivalry between them and the AMA, the medical establishment, which the medical establishment finally won for various reasons. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you could say, well, it's because at a certain point in time, all the wealthy people, Carnegie and Rockefeller and Ford, pumped all this money into Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and nobody gave any money to the herbal people.
Do you agree with that theory?
Yeah, that happened for sure.
Okay.
I mean, whether you want to call it a conspiracy or not depends on how open you are to conspiracy ideas, but it certainly happened, there's no question about it. And so for more than 50 years, people came out of medical school having been indoctrinated with the idea that herbs was a myth. They didn't really do anything, it was just folklore. If they did anything, it was just placebo effect and
Okay.
so on. And that went on for a long time. The AMA denied that ginseng did anything right up until about the 60s,
Okay.
when the Russian researchers who actually coined the term adaptogen invented this rat swimming test, which is the first thing that proved that ginseng actually did something. So you can throw the rat in the water and time how long it can swim, and then you give it some adaptogens and it'll swim twice as long, and that's incontrovertible evidence. So they finally had to turn around and, well, actually, I guess it does something. So then they had to figure out what it did, and that's kind of where the whole immune system was discovered, was by finding out how these adaptogens work. That's my
Just in the
understanding.
60s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's a very recent discovery.
Yeah.
In that sense, for the
Yeah.
West.
Yeah.